Welcome to Reflections, Monday's short-form studio feature ahead of Friday's Photo Walk podcast. Thoughtful observations on creativity and, well, just life, really. You'll find all 5 of this week's reflections on our Patreon channel, The Extra Mile. Toxic voyeurism. I've been thinking about whether to record this one for a week or so, for all kinds of reasons. But best foot forward, as my gran used to say, I'm committing this to tape, to talk in analogue terms. I hadn't heard the phrase toxic voyeurism until a couple of weeks ago. It landed on my mental new things to understand list, driving to London, listening to a radio phone-in where the host, aided by callers, was talking about this strange pull of watching other people's lives unravel. The topic was cast on the back of a case of a young Polish woman who built a following of more than 1 million on Instagram by insisting she was Madeleine McCann. We have an international audience to this show, I know, so for those who may not be au fait with the case, Madeleine McCann was the young girl, aged 3 at the time, who disappeared from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, in 2007, while her parents were eating at a nearby restaurant. Despite one of the most extensive missing child investigations in modern history, no confirmed trace of her has ever been found. Over the years, the case has drawn intense public attention. Speculation and theories of conspiracy, as you might have thought, have not made it any easier for the family. And consequently, parents Kate and Jerry, a respected GP and consultant cardiologist respectively, have been left without answers, and the world has watched them live in that uncertainty ever since. In many respects, this is a sadly perfect modern example of toxic voyeurism, a moment where the public gaze lingered, not out of malice, but because people were unable to look away from a story defined by fear, mystery, and of course, heartbreak. The attention wasn't driven by understanding or empathy alone, it was also shaped by that uncomfortable pull toward witnessing a situation no parent should ever face. A pull that years later would resurface whenever somebody online tried to attach themselves to the case for their own personal attention. I referenced the Polish Instagrammer who claimed she was Madeleine and built off the back of this wildly unfathomable claim her mammoth audience. It seemed to me that geography and nationality may have put this claim out to pasture somewhat more quickly than it did. It's been suggested that much of that following could well have been in place simply to witness the unravelling of her life and mental state, once DNA testing, which was inevitable, proved her claim to be false, manipulative, and ultimately cruel. The attention didn't grow because the claim was convincing. It grew because people were waiting for the moment it collapsed. That spectacle became the story. And somewhere in the middle of that discussion, the presenter used this term I'd never properly considered before: toxic voyeurism. It's a heavy pairing of ideas or words, isn't it? But the more I listened, captive in terms of my journey and captivated in terms of the concept of such a thing, the more I thought it threaded through our cultural history, as certainly some of the subjects we discuss on the show when it comes to talking about social media. And it's not just a commentary about the worst side of social media. It was a commentary about the human condition. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you go back far enough through the timeline of history, you'll find crowds gathering for all kinds of reasons that make today's doom-scrolling look, practically tame. Public hangings, for instance. Not hidden away, not quiet affairs, they were advertised. People brought picnics. Children stood on tiptoes. Newspapers actually printed timetables. And if you go earlier still, the Romans perfected the art of turning punishment into performance. The Colosseum wasn't simply a stadium. It was an entire industry built around drawing people in to witness brutality presented as entertainment. And before that, crucifixion was designed to be a spectacle. It wasn't just about ending a life, it was about making sure others watched it happen. If you keep pulling on that thread, you realise something uncomfortable. This impulse to gather, to observe, to slow down at the roadside is ancient. Long before smartphones and click counters and outrage-shaped headlines, humans leaned in to look at things that frightened them or unsettled them. Part curiosity, part fear, part reassurance that it's them, not us. And as grim as that sounds, it's part of our wiring. I learned from this phone-in that we're drawn to the things that unsettle us because they teach us where the edges are. Though it seems a rather desperate way to learn, doesn't it? And the difference now is scale, of course. A crowd used to be a few hundred people in a square. Now it's millions of eyes, all arriving through the same glowing doorway in our hands. That bloody smartphone. The thing we have a twisted relationship and arrangement with at times. And the pace has changed too. The Colosseum had to be swept after an event. TikTok doesn't need a broom. Stories repeat and loop and multiply. And before we've finished forming a thought, we nudge toward another clip, another twist, another shock. So, if this impulse is centuries old, then the goal isn't to outrun it or pretend we're too sophisticated to fall for it. Doom scrolling is nothing new, kids. We didn't invent it, nor did you. The modern version may be, but certainly not the concept. Look, I don't want to preach about how we avoid it. We're both big and I'm certainly ugly enough to know what's right and wrong in this discussion. My reason for mentioning it was more for the interest of the fact it's a recognised thing. I know I have moments before I click something I just know isn't going to make me feel better. I'm not for one moment claiming that I make the right decisions. Social media can do extraordinary things. It connects people who might never meet. It gives a voice to those who've been unheard for far too long. It can teach, it can inspire, comfort, amuse, and sometimes genuinely change a life. But side by side with all that good sits the appetite for spectacle. And the platforms, they know it, don't they? Outrage is sticky. Fear holds attention. Shock is a quick currency. The algorithms don't make us watch difficult things. They just seem to notice when we do. And then they think, you want more. It seems to me that understanding that pattern is half the battle. It turns the screen into something you're driving rather than something that's dragging you. You start choosing what you want to fill your mind with instead of the feed deciding for you. And in that choice, the toxic part of voyeurism loses its grip with any luck. I've actually been trying to train social media of late to show me more of what I actually want. And it is helping to a degree. But I've also noticed this. If I click on anything even slightly clickbaity or sensational, the algorithm reacts instantly, and what comes back has nothing to do with the steadier stuff that I've been training it to look for. The clickbaity stuff, the sensational stuff, jumps the queue and shows up as if I'd personally requested a full parade of it. But this observation or reflection isn't about taking a moral high ground. It's as simple as noticing when a story begins to shape my mood. If you're halfway through a scrolling session and suddenly everything feels a bit heavier, that obviously is a sign. Close it, step away. Not forever, not dramatically, just long enough to reset. I can't turn the clock back to an age before spectacle. I probably wouldn't want to. But I can be thoughtful about the attention I give away because attention is much more powerful than it used to be. It can fuel storms, stir up strangers, flatten someone's reputation in an afternoon, or convince you that you have one. But it can also lift people up in ways the Romans could never have imagined. I don't think toxic voyeurism is about the screen itself. It's that old instinct meeting modern speed. So if I'm going to navigate it with any kind of grace, maybe the goal isn't to look away entirely, but to look with awareness, to recognize when a story is becoming something I'm feeding rather than understanding. In perhaps an obvious way, acknowledging the history does help. It reminds me that this is an ancient human itch. It also reminds me that people have always learned to manage it. Crowds did leave the gallows. Audiences would drift out of the Colosseum and carry on with their day-to-day life. There's a choice woven into all of this. And on the days when the world feels particularly loud, and that seems rather a lot with the news right now, the choice is still there, even if it's just a decision to put the phone down and walk outside for a moment, or take a photograph, or listen to something gentler than a stranger's crisis. The spectacle will still be there when I return, but hopefully I'll come back to it with a steadier mind. That, more than anything, is the difference between being dragged by the noise and moving through it on my own terms.